Yeah, so my name is Akshayapradipa and I'm leading the evening tonight. So at Dharma Night in the last little while, we first explored a theme around the role of the imagination in the spiritual life. And then we're now following that up with looking at Buddhist symbols. So we had an evening on the moon. We had a conversation between Sanghadharan and Sthiramanas around how they use symbol and myth in their lives, or the role that has in their lives. And then last week we looked at the path and the lotus. And tonight we're going to look at a different Buddhist symbol which is called the Stupa. But first I just want to take a step back again and just refresh ourselves, like, what is a symbol? What is a symbol? So those of you who've been here for in the past few weeks, you might have thought about that already. What is a symbol? Stunned silence.
It's like an image or an image or some kind of thing that you, like a semiotic that you relate to some kind of meaning.
Yeah, so it's often an image and you relate to it some kind of meaning. And usually it's sort of the meaning, you can't quite explain the meaning in a sort of exhaustive way. So it's not like a sign or like something like that. It's a bit more mysterious. And so it represents something beyond itself. So last week we looked at the lotus and at the path as different ways of looking at the spiritual life. And that was they were sort of symbolizing different approaches to the spiritual life. Yeah, so I was joking the other week with Sanghadharan and Sthiramanas that obviously everybody's been on a path, everybody's seen a lotus, but who here has seen a stupa? Some hands are coming up, fantastic. Do you want to tell me a bit about where you saw the stupa and what you know about a stupa? Let's start with you, if you want to. Yeah. If you want to.
I saw it in front of my house in South Korea.
Yeah.
And I heard about the monks was living in that town.
Yeah.
A few hundreds ago.
Yeah. So
preserved that as a shadow tower. It doesn't look like this.
Yeah, so it looked like a tower, and it had to do something with the practice of the monks.
Yes, and the people in the village respected this monk.
Yeah.
As a spiritual leader.
Yeah, great. Any other encounters with stupas?
I saw quite a few in northern India where there's heavily Tibetan communities, like Ladakh, for example. In terms of the specifics, I remember reading something about it, but it's gone straight out of my head. But yeah, I saw a lot of them there. So it's good that you just said that this is the focus, because I'm quite looking forward to knowing a bit more about them, having seen quite a few.
Yeah. Okay. Any other encounters with stupas over here?
Vajrasana.
The Vajrasana stupa, yeah. So that's a bit closer to home, isn't it? What do you know about it?
Well, effectively it's a reliquary. It's where either the relics or the ashes of people are interred. And so ceremonially you're passing death on the way into the shrine. And so you process clockwise around the stupa as a reminder of impermanence on your way into the shrine.
So yeah, Vajrasana is a retreat center that belongs to this Buddhist center, which is it's quite close to. We do a lot of retreats there, and there is in fact a stupa, and there is there is some relics or ashes in there from one of our teachers, and we do often use it to do ritual there. Yeah, great. Any other encounters with stupas? Anyone else? All right. I mean, oh yeah, come on.
I'm particularly struck by the one at Sarnath in India, which is sort of marks a point. It marks the place where the Buddha taught the Dharma for the first time and successfully communicated his experience to someone else. And it's huge. It's just this big mound of stone, brick.
Yeah.
And it's quite big. It's very sort of knowing that that's what it's sort of the spot that it's sitting on and the kind of the sort of size of it. It makes quite a strong impression.
Yeah, so this stupa is sort of marking a particular occasion in the Buddha's life. Welcome to those just arriving. So it sounds like there are different stupas in different countries. There is one at the retreat center. Sometimes there are relics or ashes in them. They're used for they can be used for ritual, so they have to do with Buddhist practice, and some of them can be quite imposing architectural places, isn't it? You described it as a tower, you described the sort of mass of the stupa, and then you also pointed to the shrine, because we've got a stupa just there on the shrine. And actually we've got 6 stupas here on the shrine, but 2 are behind me, so you can't see them, and 3 are over there. So and these do in fact hold ashes from people that are connected with this center. So tonight, because the stupa is a symbol, and because in a way it's already not possible to give a sort of exhaustive, comprehensive explanation of a symbol. I'm not even going to try, basically. What I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you 3 stories from the sort of history of Buddhism and Buddhist practitioners. And from each of the 3 stories, I will draw out a little bit around like what the stupa symbolizes, and also it will then become clear a bit around and how is that actually relevant to our life. And also if we don't have the opportunity to travel and see it somewhere in India, for example. So that's what I'm going to do. And these 3 stories, in a way, we will do a little bit of time travel. So we'll also travel through Buddhist history, and at some point we might even leave the sort of linear clock time and the sort of regular bricks and mortar world and sort of cross over into a slightly more mysterious time with our stupa stories. So so that's what we're going to do tonight. And because what I was thinking is there is a sort of outer meaning to the stupa that's sort of quite obvious from like looking at it, and some of you have already described it. And then there's a sort of inner meaning around like some of the detail of the symbolism and how we might apply that. And then there's an almost secret meaning to it. So I'm going to look at the different sort of layers of meaning of this symbol. And to start us off, we'll travel back about 2,500 years in time to the time of the Buddha's life. And so the Buddha was walking and meeting people and teaching mostly in the north of India, and he did that after his enlightenment for about like 45 years. So by at some stage he was quite old and frail, and he knew that sort of his end was approaching, and he was quite frail, and he knew that his end was approaching. And in a way, because he knew that, he wanted to prepare as best as he could. And there is like quite a lot of stories from the last, particularly the last days of his life. And it's very moving and actually quite uplifting to read some of those. So he reached out to a lot of his disciples, his students. He encouraged them to ask any questions they had to make sure they understood everything that he had said clearly, to make sure that they felt confident in what they had been given by him. And he really he used every opportunity, despite being old and frail. He used every opportunity. So even when he was really very, very frail, and it was clear he was quite close to the end of his life, he was still approached by somebody who got really excited about just having heard about the Buddha and wanting his teachings. And the Buddha had an attendant called Ananda who was with him most of the time, and also looked after him. They became quite close friends. And so this friend was like, "Oh no, now is not the time. Like, you can't approach the Buddha now. I'm sorry. It's not good. It's not possible anymore." But the Buddha, he sort of heard of that interaction, and he encouraged the person to come and actually talk to him. And obviously, a lot of the followers of the Buddha. So there were his disciples who had gone forth with him. They had gone into the forest, they had left their worldly lives behind, and then there were also lay followers. He had talked to really from all walks of talked to people from all, and taught people from all walks of life, all gradients of society. They were really concerned and really worried about the fact that their teacher would pass away. And so one thing he sort of did to reassure them was to say that actually, while he would eventually die, the teachings would still continue. So in a way, the teacher was still there because the teachings would continue. So he really tried to reassure people as best as he could. And so eventually somebody asked, as it was a custom at the time, what he wanted to be done with his ashes and his relics, and how he wanted in a way to be remembered. And the Buddha was quite clear to the monks and nuns that were following him that in a way the main thing for him was they should practice. Like, they didn't need to build any sort of statues or anything for him. They would just, he would live on in their practice. But there was still a sort of request, obviously, to have something to remember. And so somebody asked him how he wanted his stupa to be built. And famously, so at the time, it was quite normal for notable people in India to be remembered with a sort of burial mound. So when he was asked that question, what he did is he took some of his robe and folded it. And so it was a sort of square, and then he took his begging bowl and turned it around. So it was a robe, square, and a half sphere of a begging bowl. But it was also that sort of pretty much most of his possessions. I mean, he had another robe, but that was sort of most of his possessions that he used to sort of symbolize this stupa. And and that was very much in line with like the tradition at the time. So after the Buddha's death, he was in fact cremated, and the ashes were put together, and it was quite a particular moment, because obviously he had attained enlightenment. And so it wasn't a regular death. Like, he had left the endless wheel of re-becoming. That was what this moment symbolized. So it's also called parinirvana. So he attained the parinirvana. And then after that, for a long time, for some hundreds of years, there were no depictions of the Buddha. So there were no Buddha statues like this, but there were symbols used for him. So sometimes it was there is sort of footprints. Sometimes it was a wheel that symbolized him turning the wheel of the Dharma. That means teaching. And then the stupa became quite an important symbol for him attaining the parinirvana and ultimately for the Buddha. So the stupa became one of the symbols for the Buddha. So when people would gather around the stupa, they would sort of think of and connect with the Buddha and with the teacher and with the teachings that he had given. And I think that's quite interesting too, because I guess nowadays we live in a world, there's a lot of images of people, and yet here we've got, we're encountering the Buddha through this symbol, which is, we could say, a bit abstract, but it's also, that sort of makes it universal. The stupa is just the stupa. It's sort of, it hasn't got a gender or race or anything anymore. It's sort of, it is a symbol for, it's a sort of a symbol that for a long time symbolized the Buddha. So, and in a way that's sort of like how, in sort of Buddhist terms, the story of the stupa starts in this very simple form of the square and the half globe, and so in that sense, on that level, the stupa then it signifies the Buddha. So. But it also signifies a sort of sense of devotion, of reverence to the teacher and to the Buddha. So our story of the stupa starts with an ending, but the ending is really the beginning, because what happens after that immediately is that there is an argument about whom the relics should belong to. It's not the monks and the nuns that are arguing. It's also not really the lay followers, but it's the sort of head of the clan, the different clans, like the clan of the Buddha, the clan of some of the lands where the Buddha walked. They all start, as they hear about that the Buddha has passed away, they all start making their claims for the ashes. And in the end, in order to avert a great big conflict, it is split up into 8 portions. And over these 8 portions in different parts of India, stupas are built. And then a few hundred years later, there is an emperor called Ashoka, who initially is like really bloodthirsty, really, really cruel, really, really horrible. And eventually, that is a story for another night, he converts to Buddhism, and then all the sort of energy that he used, to bring misery on people, he then uses to propagate Buddhism. And one of the things he does is he's set to have built 84,000 stupas, 84,000. And now I can't tell you if there are actually 84,000 stupas, but what I can tell you that there are loads of different stupas, and often they remember particular moments in the Buddha's life. So there is a stupa where Siddhartha was born. There is a stupa where he first taught, but also even much smaller sort of like moments of the Buddha's life, particularly towards the end, are commemorated with their own stupa. So there's this great many stupas, and from the Ashoka time, there's particularly one in Sanchi that you can still visit, and it's preserved super well, and it's very, very impressive to look at if you ever have the opportunity. And then what then happens is, as sort of Buddhism spreads and different Buddhist schools sort of travel, different kinds of stupas develop, who really don't look alike anymore. Like some look like towers, some are flat and wide, some are sort of like strictly white, other golden. So there's all these different stupas now. And again, one could give like a whole evening's talk about all these different kinds of stupas, but I'm not going to. And then eventually we get to the point where even here near here we have stupas, like for example the one at Vajrasana. And I was thinking, particularly in the meditation, when I look at the stupa in Vajrasana, I don't really look at, as sort of something that symbolizes impermanence or something. When I look at that stupa, I think of friendship. Because for me, this stupa, because it's connected to one of Sangharakshita's teachers, so one of the teachers of the founder of our movement, and theirs was a really strong friendship. For me, that stupa really, it stands for friendship. So, and I really love when I'm at Vajrasana, I sometimes make a whole point of like when I come up to the shrine room to bow to the stupa, and then there is the Akshayapradipa figure. But it's sort of gathering myself before I go into the shrine room, and really I find it quite uplifting to look at that stupa, because for me it really has this significance of friendship. Anyway, so in the second half we're gonna look at two other stories and a bit more around like the symbolism of the stupa, and also going to meet a practitioner who's always often associated with stupas. So that's going to be in the second half. For now, we're going to have a tea break. So do enjoy a cup of tea. Welcome if you've just joined us from the course. My name is Akshayapradipa, and tonight I have been talking about the stupa, which is one of the most important Buddhist symbols, and probably also the sort of like most famous type of Buddhist monument. And we do have a little stupa on the shrine, which you can see there in blue. And this is part of a wider exploration of Buddhist symbols. And what I said is that I would be exploring 3 different stories to do with the stupa, and use each story to sort of like draw out some of the meaning and the relevance of the stupa. And so before the break, I talked about the Buddha. So if you've been in the intro course, you heard about the story up to the Buddha's enlightenment and the Buddha's enlightenment. And so before the break, we heard the story about the Buddha's parinirvana, so the Buddha's passing away, and how after that, his relics were put in a stupa, in a sort of. There was a tradition of burial mounds in India, and his particular one was a square plus like a half round on top of it. And I then talked about how that sort of like led to a whole tradition of many, many different stupas. Firstly, around the area where the Buddha lived, the whole of India, and then eventually other countries to do with other Buddhist traditions, loads of different forms. And we even talked a bit about the stupa in Vajrasana in our retreat center. And that over time, while initially the stupa, that stupa was a symbol for the Buddha, and in a way also a symbol for or sometimes a symbol for impermanence. I'd also talked about like how for me the stupa in Vajrasana is a symbol for friendship, because it's dedicated to a friendship in a way. So that's sort of our initial encounter with the stupas. So a monument which we can touch and see with our eyes, and it's often got some relics in it, or it's said to have some relics, and who knows what relics are actually where and that sort of thing. But so it's often quite an imposing structure where that people come to often on pilgrimage or at a retreat center and do sort of like ritual around. So in a way, that's the sort of like the one level of the stupa. And then, in a way, I also said we're going to do a little bit of time travel during this evening. So we're now going to travel to the 1st century of the Christian era. So still quite a long time ago, but a few hundred years have passed. And at that time, it was quite a different time. So at that time, there were depictions of the Buddhas. There were the first sort of like Buddha statues and that sort of thing. And there was a particular Buddhist scripture that was sort of like stems from that time, and it's called the White Lotus Sutra. I've got it here. There's different translations. I've got this one. And well, I think for those of you who have I don't know, scientific training and are very much embodied in the sort of world of the material, you'll have to bear with us for a moment, because in this sutra, so one of the things that is described in here is that the Buddha, as in the Buddha we've talked about earlier, Shakyamuni, he is preaching this sutra. And it also turns out that a long, long time ago, there was a previous Buddha called Abundant Treasure, and he sort of made a vow that whenever this sutra is taught, then he will come out to testify its truth. And then there is a moment in this text, in this story, where the Buddha, Shakyamuni, that we've just met, he is basically preaching this, he is expounding the teaching of the White Lotus Sutra, and then this other Buddha appears too. A stupa appears in which the other Buddha, Abundant Treasures from aeons and aeons ago, is there, and both of the Buddhas meet. So you can sort of see, we're sort of in the 1st century, but also not really. So we're sort of going a bit out of time and space here. So the Buddha of the past, or a Buddha of the distant past, and the Buddha of our time, Shakyamuni, are meeting. So in a way, we're looking at something that's transcending time. And I'm just going to briefly, so that you just get a sort of, just like a little taste for what this is or how this looks like. I'm going to read you a little bit from it. At that time, in the Buddha's presence, there was a stupa adorned with 7 treasures, 500 yojanas. A yojana is it's like 8 miles or something. So 500 times 8 miles in height, and 250 yojanas in width and depth, that rose up from the earth and stood suspended in the air. Various kinds of precious objects adorned it. It had 5,000 railings, 10,000 rooms, and numberless streamers and banners decorated it. Festoons of jewels hanging down, and 10,000 million jeweled bells were suspended from it. All 4 sides emitted a fragrance of tamalpatra and sandalwood that pervaded the whole world. Its banners and canopies were made of 7 treasures, namely gold, silver, lapis lazuli, seashell, agate, pearl, and chameleon. And it was so high, it reached to the heavenly palaces of the 4 heavenly kings. The gods of the Tara Yastrama heaven rained down the heavenly Mandarava flowers as an offering to the treasure stupa, and other heavenly beings, and the dragons, yakshas, gandharvas, asuras, garudas, kinnaras, mahogas, human and non-human beings, an assembly of thousands, 10,000s, millions, offered all kinds of flowers, incense, necklaces, streamers, canopies, and music as alms to the treasure stupa, paying it reverence, honor, and praise. So you can see there's a lot going on. And yeah, the whole text is a bit like it. And usually when people read it, some really love it and some slightly struggle with the sort of like the abundance, the sort of phantasmagoria what's happening. But I don't know, I grew up reading a lot of like science fiction and that sort of stuff, and I really love that sort of environment of these, it's called more like Mahayana, these type of sutras. So here now we're looking more, we're sort of more concerned with what a sort of, a stupa beyond space and time, and a sort of like more distilled meaning of the stupa. And to sort of look at that in more detail, I have made a little drawing. Oops. Here we go. Okay, so it's essentially, you can hopefully see some similarity between what's on the shrine and here. This is mostly for the colors, although they're not quite correct. So there are different versions of this, and I'm just going to introduce this one because we only have one evening. Yeah. So so in this version of the stupa, there is a yellow cube, and then we have a white sphere. And then we have this cone, which is red. And then we have a sort of dish, which is supposed to be very light green, but we didn't have a light green pen. And then we have a sort of iridescent rainbow type drop on top here. I hope you can all see that. Now, what does this mean? So one thing that's so one level of looking at this is, so in Buddhism there is 6 elements, and 5 of them are represented here. So the yellow cube has to do with the earth, and then the white sphere has to do with water, the red cone has to do with fire, this dish is air, and then we've got space. And then you could imagine that there is a sort of blue sky around here, and that's consciousness, and that's sort of like the 6 elements in Buddhism. That's sort of like all that, sort of like a sort of depiction of the whole universe in a way. But when I'm talking about earth, water, fire, and air, I don't mean earth in a sort of literal sense. I don't mean water in a literal sense. I don't mean fire in a literal sense, and I don't mean air in a literal sense. So, because in Buddhism, sort of one of the words for elements is Maha Bhutas. So that's the Maha is big, Bhuta could be the element, but it could also be a ghost, or it could be a sort of big illusion. So there's a bit more going on here than literally looking at the 4 elements in a sort of scientific, let's break down things into their constituent parts bit. So another way of looking at this would be to look at it in terms of energies, yeah? So, so the yellow cube is then earth energy. So that could mean, obviously, earth is solid, it's often quite fixed, hard. So if we're looking at that as a sort of energy experience, then that could be, I don't know, feeling a bit stuck, feeling a bit sort of lethargic, maybe a bit depressed, a bit down, heavy, that sort of thing. So that's another way of looking at, I mean, energy, but also how we might experience it within us. So then water. How would you describe water? Give me some words. What does water do? What's
Fluid.
the fluid? It is fluid, yeah. Exactly. Moving, yeah. Yeah. Does it move freely in all directions? Does it move in a particular direction? Sorry, who said moving?
Generally in one direction.
Generally in one direction, yeah. Maybe in 2. Maybe there's a little bit of turbulence, but yeah. So what, as a sort of energetic state within us, how might that feel?
More free, but not completely free.
More free, but not completely free. Yeah. So there is some movement, some freedom of movement in some aspects, but not a lot of freedom of movement in other aspects, or not a lot of like free energy in other aspects. Yeah. Any other sort of thoughts on water energy, what that might feel like?
Yes, water moves, but it would move down kind of like a narrow band. Like if there's a river, it's got like, okay, it can move within here, but it can't go out of the bounds of that. So it's
Yeah. Again, so there is movement, but it's sort of within quite particular parameters. Yeah. Okay, and then we've got fire. So in terms of fire, what might that be like in terms of energy? Is there movement? Is there? Yeah.
Very intense movement.
Yeah. Possibly this. Yeah. Okay.
Hard to control.
It could be out of control, indeed. Yeah, because what's happening, I mean, fire, it's usually going upwards in some way, isn't it? It's sort of, that's also what sort of, I guess, why it's this cone shape. So it can be quite an intense movement, but in sort of like one direction, isn't it? So we might feel that in a positive way when we're feeling really inspired, we're like really going for something, but it's still not sort of completely free. Yeah. And in fact, it might even be sometimes a little bit exhausting. Any other thoughts, observations on fire?
Freedom.
Sorry?
Freedom.
Freedom?
In terms of the shape, how the fires move.
Yeah, exactly. Although, I mean, fire rarely burns to the side or to the bottom, isn't it? It's sort of, it goes up, but then within that, the shape is quite loose, isn't it? Yeah. Yeah.
Is there any aspect of danger for fire, or?
Well, I think it's sort of, I guess with all of these, you could look at them in like a positive or a negative way. So it's not really about like danger or like good or bad or anything. It's more like sort of different qualities in a way. Yeah. So then up here we've got air. So what's the quality of air?
Expansive.
Yeah.
Completely free and light.
Yeah, free and light, yeah. Yeah. But then if this is already free and light and expansive, what's space? What's going on there?
Infinite. Infinite.
It is infinite, indeed, yeah. So it's sort of, so what is called space here, the word is akasha, and yeah, it is infinite, and it's a sort of primordial, it's even more subtle than space. So space might be expanding in all direction, but this rainbow drop, the space, it sort of really represents the sort of uninhibited, unlimited energy that can move freely in all directions. So, in this movement from, earth energy, solidity, maybe even a bit of stuckness, firmness, to water, which is flowing, but often one-directional, to air, which is moving upwards and has more freedom and more sort of like energy available, to air, to space. What we're sort of seeing, it's sort of like it's getting more and more subtle from the bottom to up here. So it's getting more and more subtle. And in a way, one way of looking at this is that it's a sort of way of looking at the spiritual life, looking at spiritual development in terms of energy. So one way of looking at the spiritual life is that we might start off feeling on a sort of like energy level. The reason why we might come originally to the Buddhist center is because something's happened in our life, or we're dissatisfied with something, or we're feeling sad or stuck or a bit depressed, so something's not quite working, we're sort of coming up against something. And then we might, or we might be over here, where it's sort of like there is movement and energy available in some areas of our lives, but then in other areas it does still feel quite stuck. And then through Buddhist, through practice, in a way, we're sort of looking at liberating our energies. Yeah, so we're doing different kinds of practices. So, for example, we've done the Metta Bhavana earlier. So, in the Metta Bhavana practice, what we do is we develop positive emotion towards ourselves and towards other people. And what that does is that, in a way, we become much more free-flowing. So there might be, for example, areas where we develop loving kindness to parts of ourselves which previously were no-go areas, yeah? Or we develop loving kindness to people which we previously didn't notice or didn't like, or we actually really were dependent on them, and sort of we are sort of developing much more freedom in terms of like being ourselves, being truly ourselves, and being truly sort of relaxed and ourselves with other people. That's one of the ways in which we're developing through doing the Metta Bhavana practice. And again, in the mindfulness of breathing practice, we're sort of starting to work with our minds so that it's not going into this habitual, compulsive ping pong between like what we want, what we don't want, but we're sort of starting to make our mind pliable and sort of get the first sort of like glimpses of some peace, some quietness of mind, and through that energy becomes available over time. And we might notice that within the meditation or after the meditation, but also it might become clearer as we sort of do the practice for a while. We might not notice much at all while doing the meditation, but then it sort of becomes clearer around the rest of our lives. So let's take a few moments and maybe in twos or threes, just have a little chat about like just any responses to thinking about the spiritual life and spiritual practice in terms of energy, and if any of these states sort of like feel familiar to you, so just in twos or threes for a few minutes. Let's maybe hear a bit like what you came up with. Is anyone happy to share?
I was sharing with my group that I feel like different elements at different stages in your practice. For sure that like when I told them that when I first like came here, it was very much the earthy element as you described it, like feeling stuck, feeling heavy, feeling like dense. And then as you develop in practice, like you feel different bits of everything. Like the watery bit feels as if like, you've grasped something but like not fully everything, and it's like taking you in a certain direction. With the fire bit, it's like sometimes you feel that there's like a knowledge that like I was describing it as not like a scientific knowledge, but like more of like a spiritual knowledge. Like you've grasped something and it feels like very light, and it feels like you're like kind of like, that like grounds you in your like knowledge and your like appreciation of things. And then the airy space, like the air and space, is more like a very like fleeting sense of spaciousness that you sometimes feel when you're just meditating deeply, or like after like a long meditation, or like even when you go into it like on it like for a full day, you feel like a lightness or like spaciousness in how you experience things. And I feel that it just fluctuates of like how you relate to these like different elements.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. No, I think, and it's hopefully clear, but it's not like a sort of like absolute stages of the spiritual paths, like who is a cone, who is a square, like we're not doing that. But I don't know, sometimes I personally find it really helpful to think about things in terms of energy, because it just makes me relate to things differently, and it's also introducing a sort of more refined awareness, but that's a bit away from like giving things labels of like emotions and things. So yeah, thanks for describing those in the way you experience them. Yeah, thank you. Would anyone else like to share something?
We were discussing that we think that the most interesting bit is actually gaining the awareness of where you are and on which of the stages, but also that without sort of the level of energy, if you just jumped straight up to the air or the space, you wouldn't feel grounded and you would feel like you're just going to dissipate and you sort of need the journey.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, you need the difference to know where you are. Yeah, interesting. Thank you. Other responses? Yeah.
I didn't share this in the group, but I found that from the bottom to top, it's become less and less tangible. Like, you know, earth or dirt, you can feel it, and water, you can run your finger through the fire, you can't touch it, and air, you don't even know where it is. Just feel like, you know, there's a progression of like intangibleness going this direction.
Yeah, it gets more and more mysterious, doesn't it? Yeah, absolutely. What even is infinite space? Yeah. Yeah. Fantastic, yeah. Yeah, so yes, our founder Sangharakshita says about this, and it isn't surprising perhaps that the Stupa should be able to remind us of the need for synthesizing the different aspects, the different poles of our own unruly natures, because it's only by accomplishing this synthesis on higher and higher levels, ever more refined levels, progressively higher and higher levels of our being, it's only in this way, only by doing this, that we can really and truly ourselves in the end evolve and continue evolve, in fact fulfill the whole course, the whole process of what he calls the higher evolution, but basically we're realizing our spiritual potential. So so that's sort of like one way of looking at the Stupa and how we can approach the Stupa. And we can make this quite practical. So I have a friend who he told a story where he used to live in like a Buddhist house share, and it wasn't going so well because he would frequently blow up in a temper. But he was really into the Stupa, and there is a practice where you visualize the Stupa in a particular way. And so he did that practice, and while he was doing it, he was particularly paying attention to essentially the sort of space between water and fire, and the boundary between it, and then at some stage they sort of dissolve into each other. So he was particularly paying attention to those stages. And actually over time that really helped him to notice when the anger was rising up, and he could sort of start to notice it before he got into arguments with people. So that was I guess that could be one application. So and that is one way of like looking at the different the symbolism of the Stupa and its different elements in terms of the elements not in a material way, but in a sort of like energetic, qualitative way, which then leads us to look at spiritual practice as working with energy and sort of consecutively more refined energies. And in a way that's, I'd say it's sort of, it's the sort of, maybe like the inner meaning of the Stupa. Just looking at the time. So, and then there's a third story that I would like to tell you, which I won't get to explain into loads of detail, but I do want to leave you with an image from that story. So we're going to do a bit more travel. We're going to do a bit more time travel, and this time we're in the sort of 7th to 8th century in what is nowadays Pakistan. And there lives a very well known Buddhist practitioner and sage who, in fact, he's got his own festival day here. So it's Padmasambhava. Who knows anything about Padmasambhava? Just would you people just yeah. Give me a few snippets. Like, what sort of person is he, or what do you know about him?
He brought Buddhism to Tibet.
He brought Buddhism to Tibet. Yeah. How did he do that?
By not battling with, but effectively converting the demons.
By converting the demons. Yeah. Okay. And yeah. Interesting. Anything else?
Very wild.
Very wild. In what way?
No, it's kind of a bit like a shaman, magician type figure.
Yeah. He's sometimes taken a bit license with the things that he's done. Yeah.
A wrathful smile.
A wrathful smile. Yeah, that's a contradiction in itself, isn't it? Yeah. So he's a sort of, in a way, he was a historical person, so we know he lived. In fact, you can see the ruins of Nalanda University and people can tell you where his room was. So he did really exist, but his sort of biography, it's got layers and layers of myth, and in fact it's written in twilight language, and it's quite I don't know, it's quite difficult to I don't know, it's sort of like, it was our ordinary minds, it's quite difficult to access. And in his sort of like more mythical biography, he was born from a lotus in a lake. And it just so happens that at that time there was a king who was looking for an heir. And as this king heard of this boy born in a lotus from a lake, the king thought, that's going to be my heir. So he sort of approached with his entourage the lake and met Padmasambhava, and Padmasambhava went with him and was introduced to like essentially the whole entourage of this king. But Padmasambhava realized, even as I think he was born as a 14-year-old boy. Anyway, so at that moment, he sort of realized that, when he sort of realized where things was going, and that for some people it might have been a really enticing prospect to be an heir to this king. But for Padmasambhava, because he was already a very highly attained spiritual practitioner, he was like, oh no, I'm going to spend my whole day ruling a kingdom, but really what I want to do is I want to practice the Buddhist teachings, I want to teach other people, that's what I want to dedicate my life to, and I don't really want to deal with all this. And so he then had to take some quite drastic measures, basically, in order to get kicked out of the king's palace. And what happened there is, again, a subject for a different talk. And when he was expelled from the king's palace, essentially he was living outside of the kingdom, and there were these cremation grounds. So as you remember from the beginning of the talk, at the time, what would be happening when somebody died is they would be burned, and then there would be these places where people were cremated, and sometimes there would be leftover bones and other bits. So nobody really wanted to be there. They were quite scary places, and also, traditionally I think it was also thought to be unclean, but mostly it was really scary places. And so in Padmasambhava's autobiography, you find, or in Padmasambhava's biography, you find these stories of him hanging out in these cremation grounds, and there are all sorts of quite drastic descriptions of the horrible sort of like demons that he meets there. But also, in a way, another way of looking at it is we are in a cremation ground here. So you don't have to particularly even look at the news to be reminded of that. I think the news is when we're more acutely aware of it. And also sometimes when things in our life happened, you were more acutely aware of it. Like, I don't know, when something goes wrong, I don't know, somebody dies, we have an illness, we have a breakup, there is a redundancy, whatever. We become aware of this sort of like cremation ground moments in our lives. So for Padmasambhava, it wasn't just that he spent time in these really scary places and he wasn't scared and he didn't run away. But what he did was he sort of spent time there and he worked with whatever the beings were that were there and sort of like, in a way gave them so much friendship and love that they started to be on his side. He was sort of with them, and he converted, in a way, that's how he converted demons. He was with whatever was there, which sort of all the scary beings, all the scary energies, and he sort of brought them along with him. And so he became so known for this way of practicing, where in a way nothing is excluded. Yeah, you're not just practicing when you're having like a good day or something, but all the anger, the grief, all of that is allowed. You're practicing with all that. Nothing is excluded. That when a different king in a different kingdom was trying to build a Buddhist monastery, which every night was being taken down by the demons, it was clear that there was only one person who could help, Padmasambhava. But here's the question, so what did Padmasambhava do in order to actually stay in those scary places? What did he do while he was in the cremation ground? And what did he do that sort of like helped him to be, to sort of like face, but also convert all these sort of like difficult beings' energies? He sat with his back leaning on the stupa. So he was leaning on the stupa while he was in the cremation ground. And so there are pictures, and there is also in sort of like his life story, descriptions of how he's sitting there and he's leaning on the stupa. And what he's sort of leaning on is, obviously there's the whole history of like the stupa meaning the Buddha, the stupa meaning the Buddhist teachings. But in a way, what he's also leaning on is, because he was already a very realized practitioner, it's sort of the reality as it really is, and his sort of like experience of that, and the trust of the practice that he had done, that he could sort of like lean on while he was doing that. And I think that's, for me, it's a very evocative sort of image of leaning on the stupa in the midst, in the sort of like craziness of whatever is happening, and yeah, it's sort of this slightly. It's also sort of like slightly leaning back, not slightly leaning in. It's a sort of resting, knowing. Of sort of confidence of what we've been given, like the teachings and the practice, and a sort of confidence and knowing in that, and knowing that whatever sort of presents itself in the outer world, that can sort of that can be faced, that can be met. So I find this a very inspiring image, which is why I wanted to end on that. So, the stupa. So today I talked a bit about the Buddhist parinirvana and how stupas became to be there and in so many different shapes in the first place. And then we looked a bit at the symbolism of the stupa, and I particularly drew out like the sort of energy symbolism and how we might use that to reflect on our practice in terms of energies and refining energies. And then I talked about Padmasambhava and how he sits in the cremation ground, leaning on the stupa, leaning on the teachings, the sort of like vision of reality. And I think that's sort of my exploration of the stupa for tonight. So thanks for joining.